do you enforce that? Now, before the internet, what did we have?
Magazines.
Correct. Now, magazines, there was a very good trade in magazines, I seem to recall as a young fellow, that you pass them on. So how do you stop it? It's almost impossible to stop it, particularly if you've got internet. As soon as somebody blocks a door, somebody will open another one.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
The horse has bolted,
It has.
and there are people that are ahead of the game. However, I did read this morning that the Network for Learning, which provides fast broadband to schools, revealed that it has blocked 5.15 million attempts to access porn from the school network in New Zealand in the 3 months to September 30th. 5.15 million.
It's amazing.
In 3 months during school hours. So that absolutely blew my mind. So I'm like, well, if we need to try and protect kids from it and from themselves looking for it, because
should have a version of the parental lock system at the school.
Well, they have.
Well,
It's blocked it.
Somebody gets around it.
No, but they haven't. Yeah, so they can see what kids are searching for.
Apologies.
So if they're doing that in school hours, what are they doing and what are they saying
At
outside
home.
of school hours? That's really scary to me. I think we need to do everything we can. We can't just give up because we think it's too hard.
No, we shouldn't. But I mean, how do you, if people are at home, they've got parents looking.
I don't know.
But then you're out on, and how many people of teenage years have cell phones that are internet capable?
Absolutely. I don't even know where to start.
No,
I mean,
it's terribly difficult, isn't it?
But there has to be
You've got
a
to
way.
try, eh?
Yeah, because you've got to try, and even if it stops some kids from getting to it, that's worth doing.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating area. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there. All right, very quickly to end the program, the charity behind the Movember campaign, which sees facial hair grown to raise funds and awareness for causes, is calling on companies to let their workers finish early to talk about their mental health. A number of New Zealand businesses are on board for the happy hour for mental health concept, letting their employees leave half an hour early every day for the month of November. The idea is to encourage people to open up to their colleagues, friends, family about their mental well-being in a bid to make these types of conversations a part of everyday life. Jack, what do you reckon?
I'm glad you asked her.
I think it's a great initiative. I think that people definitely need to talk more, share more, that mental health is crucial. So I like the idea of it. I just think that shutting or finishing 30 minutes early isn't necessarily going to make men go away and converse about their mental health if it's the end of the working day. I think that's sort of counterintuitive. If it was maybe given a longer lunch break, so it was during the day rather than, because otherwise people, it's just going to bleed into evening time.
Just leave early, it just becomes a shorter working day.
Yeah, it's hard enough getting men talking about their feelings.
What do you think, Chris? That's a good
I'd
move?
just like to say that don't forget that shaving is an affectation. Right? It's an affectation.
Yeah,
you don't need to shave. There's no medical thing for it.
Yeah.
It's an affectation that people have started some time ago. As a beard wearer,
It's a very nice beard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I do support what Jack is saying. It seems somewhat artificial to be saying, okay, it's 4:30, knock off and talk about your mental health issues.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that easy, and in particular industries, it's never going to happen. But let's think about mental health as being the real issue that it is and find solutions.
Indeed. Very interesting and quite profound thoughts at the end there. Chris Orr and Jack Nairn, rather. Thank you very much. It's been a great panel. Really enjoyed it.
You've been a wonderful host.
Great stuff. Thanks as well to listeners for all of your texts and observations. We'll be back tomorrow with Wallace. Here's Checkpoint.
The man accused of murdering Grace Millane took explicit photos of her after she died. Tonight on Checkpoint, we'll have the details of the case outlined by the Crown. The defence says Grace's death was an accident, an unforeseen and unintended consequence of a consensual act. The Prime Minister orders an immigration U-turn on partnership visas. And the former doctor accused of killing a Dunedin teenager suggested she'd committed suicide, according to a witness. Indignant and defensive. Who's been described that way in the superannuation overpayment lawsuit? And there's 26 people in the race. No, we're not talking about the Melbourne Cup rerun here. We're talking about prospects for the All Blacks coach. We'll have all of that, and don't forget you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Crown says the man accused of murdering Grace Millane took explicit photos of her after she died. The 27-year-old man, who has name suppression, is on trial at the High Court in Auckland. In his opening address, Crown Prosecutor Robin McCubrae told the court the accused man's internet history showed he had looked up Waitakere Ranges and Hottest Fire in the early hours of December the 2nd. It is the Crown's case that Ms Millane was already dead by this time and the man watched pornography and took photos of her body. Mr McCubrae says several hours later he went out and bought a large suitcase.
And at some point during that day, we don't know exactly when, he contorted Ms Millane's body into that suitcase. And as I said, he went to the nearby Countdown and selected a number of cleaning products. He took a taxi to the car hire place. He hired a car and then returned to his apartment.
Robin McCubrae said the accused man's actions showed Grace Millane's death was not an accident. But in his opening statement, the defence lawyer says the death was the unintended consequence of consensual sexual activity. Ian Brookie said Ms Millane had consented to his client restricting her breathing. The Dunedin doctor accused of murdering a teenage girl suggested to the 16-year-old's mother she may have committed suicide. Vernod Scantha is on trial for the murder of Amber Rose Rush on February the 2nd last year. The Crown case is he entered her home using a spare key, smothered her, then stabbed her to death to stop her making claims that would have ended his career. His former girlfriend, Bridget Clinton, detailed how the 32-year-old met with Miss Rush's mother on February the 4th, bringing her flowers and a card.
He sat next to her, talking to her, and suggested, was it suicide? To which she absolutely vehemently said no. And then there were discussions about who could have done it, and I wouldn't say discussions, it was more him saying, do you think it was X, Y, Z?
Bridget Clinton, Vernod Scantha's former girlfriend, Amber Rose Rush's mother, later died of a suspected suicide. 2 people have died while climbing at the Remarkables near Queenstown. Emergency services were alerted shortly before midday about 2 climbers falling from the side of a cliff face. The police say the pair were on the popular Grand Traverse, a single-day alpine climbing route. The body of one climber has been recovered and the police are working to recover the other body. WorkSafe has been notified and is making initial inquiries. RNZ understands the business involved is a Wanaka-based climbing company, Aspiring Guides. An Auckland councillor is furious there were 2 massive scrub fires on landmark volcanic cones overnight because of fireworks. Maunga Kiakia Mount Wellington and Maungawhau Mount Eden were lit up with flames last night after fireworks went wrong. The Tupuna Maunga Authority is stationing more security staff at 14 Maunga this weekend to stop fireworks being set off. The City Councillor for the Albert Eden Roskill Ward, Kathy Casey, says the government needs to step up.
If the government can't support a ban on the private sale and use of fireworks, we are not doing everything we can to protect these sacred places. And that's been shown last night with Maungarea and Maungawhau. Those fires are it leaves me speechless with rage because it can be prevented.
Kathy Casey is travelling to Wellington next week to make a case to a select committee for banning fireworks. Immigration New Zealand has been told to reverse its tougher stance on partnership visas. The change in approach by immigration officials to partnership visas, insisting couples have to spend time living together in order to be eligible, means Indians in particular have had a much harder time bringing their spouses to New Zealand. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has told officials to go back to giving exemptions to couples in arranged marriages. She says immigration officials made the changes without Cabinet authority. The High Court in Auckland has been told Winston Peters was indignant and defensive when first notified he had been overpaid his pension. A manager for the Ministry of Social Development was called by the Crown to give evidence as part of the Deputy Prime Minister's legal action, claiming a breach of his privacy. Our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch is following the case.
The manager, Meredith Nugent, told the court Mr Peters did not declare he was in a relationship when he applied for superannuation in 2010. The discrepancy came to light in 2017 when Mr Peters' partner lodged her pension application. Ms Nugent said Mr Peters was very unhappy when she rang him about the error, and the clear undertone was, how dare MSD contact him about such a thing? After meeting with Mr Peters, Ms Nugent concluded he had made a genuine mistake. From Auckland, Craig McCulloch.
The police have launched a new strategy to try to reduce the number of Māori in the justice system and mend what has been described as a severed relationship with tangata whenua. Te Huringa o Te Tai will replace a 2012 strategy which aimed to decrease the number of Māori offenders by 10%. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
The Police Commissioner has described Te Huringa o Te Tai as a long-term approach to reducing rates of offending, reoffending and victimisation of Māori. Mike Bush met with iwi leaders in Wellington today to launch the strategy, which aims to reduce reoffending by 25% in the next 5 years. He said police will create partnerships with whānau, hapu and iwi to improve the well-being of Māori who come to police attention. The strategy also aims to improve police understanding of the Māori view of the world. Ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui, aho.
It's 6 minutes past 5. New Zealand Rugby says the next All Blacks coach will definitely be a Kiwi. The sport's governing body has invited applications from 26 coaches to replace the outgoing Steve Hansen. New Zealand Rugby chair Brent Impey says no foreign coaches will be considered. Interviews will take place over the next few weeks with Impey, but Impey says they will not be drawn on who's on the list of potential coaches. Racing Victoria, which runs the Melbourne Cup, says whips could disappear from horse racing in the next decade if a public backlash continues. Chief Executive Giles Thompson predicts whips will no longer be used in 10 to 15 years. The New Zealand jockey Michael Walker was given a record $10,000 fine and banned for 7 races after using his whip excessively before the 100-metre mark.
We are not out there to hurt horses. You know, you see a lot of trainers and staff, they look after their horses better than humans get looked after.
Michael Walker placed second in the Melbourne Cup. That's the news.
Who does an average Kiwi think an average Kiwi is?
It's an old white man, pot belly, like hat, black singlet, gumboots, stubbies, can of spates, drives a truck, has a dog, says bugger a lot, and is like, and then has an unseen partner who makes all the food.
Not Your Average Radio. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, warnings about Canada's drinking water, the year-long investigation into lead contamination and what it's found. And after 10, Irish essayist Sinead Gleeson on her powerful depiction of sickness, health and motherhood in her acclaimed book Constellations. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern half of the North Island from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty, mainly fine, warm with high cloud, areas of low cloud and drizzle developing in Northland tonight, then spreading everywhere tomorrow evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, mainly fine, warm with high cloud and the chance of a shower. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, mostly cloudy, scattered rain tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods, patchy rain or drizzle in the afternoons and evenings. Bulla and Westland, periods of rain heavy about the ranges. Canterbury, mostly cloudy with scattered rain. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for joining us. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. A jury has heard the man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane went on a Tinder date with another woman while her body was in a suitcase. For the first time, details surrounding Ms Millane's death have been revealed in court as her parents sat in the public gallery. There is no dispute she died in the accused man's apartment, but the jury has been asked to consider whether it was intentional or whether it was an accident. Our reporter Sarah Robson is covering the case and she filed this report.
Grace Millane's parents, David and Gillian, held hands as they walked into the High Court in Auckland this morning to come face to face for the first time with the man accused of murdering their daughter. The 27-year-old man, whose name is suppressed, denies the charge and is facing a 4-week jury trial. In court this morning, Crown lawyer Robin McCoubrey laid out the case against him. He said the pair had met on Tinder and had been to a number of bars before heading back to the accused's apartment.
And let me say this, they were plainly comfortable in one another's company that evening. They were plainly enjoying themselves.
Ms Mullane was last seen on CCTV footage heading into the City Life Hotel just after 9:30 on the evening of December the 1st last year. Robin McCoubrey told the jury it's not disputed that that's where she died.
And what led to that is obviously why you were here. The pathologist who examined her body will tell us about a bruise he found on the left side of her neck, and will tell us that the cause of her death was pressure to the neck.
The court heard the accused initially told the police that he had met up with Ms Mullane for a drink and they had parted company. Then he changed his story and told the police he and Ms Mullane had had rough sex and took intimate photos of each other. He then went and had a shower and fell asleep. The court heard he told police that when he woke up the next day, he found Ms Mullane's body on the floor. But Robin McCoubrey told the jury the man's internet history in the early hours of December the 2nd shows otherwise.
You can see that it's a Google search for Waitakere Ranges. And of course, as you know, that's where Ms Mullane was buried. Then if you go down to entry number 3, using the column on the left-hand side, you see that there's a Google search for hottest fire.
Robin McCoubrey said it was plain that Ms Mullane was dead at that point, and the accused was trying to find a place to hide and then dispose of her body. The accused also took 7 explicit photos of her and looked up porn.
So if it's right that Ms Mullane's dead because of the searches that have been carried out for the Waitakere Ranges and the hottest fire, then he wasn't distressed by what occurred or concerned by her death.
Several hours later, Mr McCoubrey said the accused went out and bought a large suitcase.
That day, we don't know exactly when, he contorted Ms Mullane's body into that suitcase. And as I said, he went to the nearby countdown and selected a number of cleaning products. He took a taxi to the car hire place. He hired a car and then returned to his apartment.
Leaving Ms Mullane's body in the suitcase at his apartment, Robin McCoubrey said the accused went to Ponsonby to meet up with another woman for drinks. The jury heard the man later returned to his apartment, wheeled Ms Mullane's body in the suitcase to his hire car on a baggage trolley and drove to the Waitakere Ranges where he buried it. Mr McCoubrey said the Crown would argue that the man had strangled Ms Mullane and he was guilty of murder.
Only 2 people know what happened in that room. One of them can't tell us, and the other one hasn't told the truth about what happened.
But the accused man's lawyer, Ian Brookie, said Ms Mullane's death was an accident.
Ms Mullane's death occurred during a perfectly ordinary, casual, sexual encounter between a young couple who had met up through Tinder, had a Saturday night out drinking together. They were enjoying each other's company.
Ian Brookie said they had sex together and with Ms Mullane's consent, his client had restricted her breathing. Mr Brookie said Ms Mullane was not to blame, but her death was an unforeseen and unintended consequence of that consensual sexual activity.
Put simply, this death was an accident. He certainly didn't murder her. Neither of them expected that this act would cause her death, and that was never what was intended or what was wanted.
The accused man cried in the dock as his lawyer spoke. The first evidence presented to the jury today was a statement from Ms Mullane's father, David. It was read to the court by Robin McCoubrey, and in it Mr Mullane said his daughter had just graduated from university and was travelling the world for a year. She kept in regular contact with her parents and her brothers.
She was in good spirits, and I think if she had been unhappy, I would have known. If not from Grace herself, then she would have told Jill. Grace and Jill were very close, and I would describe them as good friends. Even when Grace went away, the bond was still strong.
David and Gillian Mullane have been sitting in the front row of the packed public gallery throughout the day. Mrs. Mullane cried as her husband's evidence was read to the jury. The Crown expects to call almost 40 witnesses in the case, and the jury has already heard evidence from the police officer who found the suitcase with Ms. Mullane's body in it in the Waitakere Ranges. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And just some traffic news for commuters in Wellington. Emergency services are at the scene of a single vehicle crash at the Terrace Tunnel. Police say the southbound lane is closed and northbound traffic is down to one lane. So motorists should expect delays and avoid the area if at all possible. The former Dunedin doctor accused of murdering teenager Amber Rose Rush suggested to her mother the 16-year-old may have committed suicide. When that was dismissed, he offered the names of potential suspects in her murder. Vinod Scantha is on trial in the High Court at Dunedin. Timothy Brown has been following the case.
Today, the jury heard from one of the witnesses who knew the 32-year-old accused best at the time of Amber Rose Rush's death in February last year. Vinod Scantha's former girlfriend, Bridget Clinton, gave evidence for much of today. She expected him to visit on the evening of February the 2nd, the day Miss Rush was killed. Prosecutor Richard Smith took Ms. Clinton through a text message exchange which followed when he didn't show up.
So that's now the early hours of Saturday,
Yes,
the 3rd
correct.
of February. He said, all right, I'm coming, geez. You've said, I'll paraphrase these, you don't want to see him, and then you've basically told him, don't come, and you're done with him. Would that be fair enough?
Done with him, done with it.
But the accused arrived at her home in Balclutha, 80 kilometres from Dunedin, about an hour later with a teenage friend who has name suppression.
He turned up at my house between 2 and 2:30 a.m. and he said when he got there after a certain time that he just got those last messages then, because he hadn't read them.
The group spent some time talking early that morning before they all went to bed. The Crown case is shortly before midnight. The teenage friend drove Mr. Scantha to Miss Rush's home in the Dunedin suburb of Corstorphine, drew a map of the house's layout on the dashboard of the car, and told him where to find a spare key. The Crown says the accused then entered the home, went to the teenager's bedroom, smothered her with pillows and stabbed her to death to stop her coming forward with claims he was touching up minors, giving them alcohol and offering money for sex. Ms. Clinton says when everyone awoke, Mr. Scantha suggested having a bonfire in her backyard. The three and her teenage son went to the warehouse to buy supplies for the fire, and Vinod Scantha bought her son a video game. She says her son found the video game wasn't in its case when they got home, so she took him back to the warehouse, and the fire was going when they returned.
That was when Vinod said that he was burning his daggiest clothes to, get the fire going. And I had plenty of cardboard around. Yeah, and we're toasting marshmallows.
Vinod Scantha and his teenage friend stayed a second night in Balclutha before all three returned to Dunedin on February the 4th. Bridget Clinton says the trio visited Miss Rush's mother, Lisa Ann Rush, at a motel where she was staying later that day. She says on the way there, Mr. Scantha bought flowers and a card for her from the New World supermarket where Miss Rush had worked before her death.
I remember Vinod was seated next to her, talking to her, and suggested, was it suicide? To which she absolutely vehemently said no. And then there were discussions about who could have done it, and I wouldn't say discussions, it was more him saying, oh, well, do you think it was XYZ?
During cross-examination from defence lawyer Jonathan Eaton QC, Bridget Clinton says she thought Mr. Scantha was sympathetic at the time.
Generally, am I right that your assessment of how Vinod behaved there was that he appeared to be both sympathetic and he looked very concerned and sad for Lisa?
That was my impression at the time.
Yeah.
Mr. Scantha's teenage friend is expected to give evidence early next week. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
And it's almost 5:20. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Immigration New Zealand has been told to reverse its newfound tough stance on partnership visas at the request of the Prime Minister. The changes to the policy, which have hit the Indian community particularly hard, have led to protests and some people resigning from their long-time Labour Party memberships. Others have vowed not to vote for Labour in next year's election. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters claimed credit for the changes, but Jacinda Ardern has put a stake in the ground, telling government officials to return to allowing exemptions for couples in arranged marriages. Our political reporter Jo Moyer has the story.
A change in approach by immigration officials to partnership visas, insisting that couples have to spend time living together in order to be eligible, means Indians in particular are having a much harder time bringing their spouses to New Zealand. After people spoke out about the tougher stance, New Zealand First MP Shane Jones lashed out at the Indian community, last month telling them to catch the next flight home if they didn't like the immigration policy here. New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters came into bat for his colleague, saying last month that his party was responsible for the crackdown on the visas.
Well, if you're wanting to say, has New Zealand First had an influence on trying to tidy up the quality of information on which Immigration Department relies, the answer is profoundly yes.
He says it's simple. Arranged marriages are not a legal partnership.
It's clear as daylight. They're not partners. Full stop. I mean, that's what the rule says. You've got to be a partner. If they're not a partner, how can you construct them as a partner when they're not?
Mr Jones's rhetoric has ramped up considerably in recent weeks. Today he responded to claims from the Indian community that he was racist by describing it as a Bollywood overreaction. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has called time on the row. She says immigration officials made the changes without Cabinet authority and now she wants it changed back.
That was changed as a result of Immigration New Zealand officials changing the way they were operating. They did not do that under the authority of Cabinet. My expectation is that we'll reverse back to the status quo and the way it was operating before.
Mr Jones had no idea the policy was being reversed, but says it won't stop him.
Just because we've signed up to the coalition agreement doesn't stop me, as a retail politician belonging to a 9-person caucus, continuing to evolve our thinking in relation to immigration.
The Immigration Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says his officials made the change without telling him.
Well, it would have been helpful to know what they had in mind, but they have given me an explanation, which is that they felt making this change brought consistency to their decision making and made those decisions align with government policies.
He says Mr Peters' claims he influenced the change don't tally with what his officials have told him. And he offered one explanation for that.
But I know we've been making a lot of immigration decisions at Cabinet in the last few months.
So he got confused?
Well, again, it's a good question to ask the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Lees-Galloway says he had nothing to do with the changes that resulted in a huge backlash from the Indian community.
Well, I'll tell you where the Ian Lees-Galloway fingerprints are, cleaning it up.
The Prime Minister and Winston Peters are now at odds.
There are some areas where you hear opinions from New Zealand First MPs that are not the opinions of Labour MPs or Green MPs.
But it's more than an opinion. It's problematic when the Deputy Prime Minister is claiming to be responsible for a change in Immigration New Zealand policy and you say that's not accurate.
I've just explained the scenario.
Mr Peters has just arrived back at Parliament this afternoon after spending 2 days in the Auckland High Court, where he's pursuing a privacy lawsuit against former national ministers and high-profile public servants. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
As mentioned, New Zealand First MP Shane Jones says people dissatisfied with the tougher partnership rules should get on a plane home if they're not happy, while a man we'll call Arjun is doing exactly that after his wife was declined a visa following their arranged marriage in India. He has New Zealand residency, but says he can't wait for a review of his wife's case after taking months to get this far. But Arjun says the government now needs to be clear about whether it's going to reopen the cases of those in arranged marriages who have also been declined visas in the clampdown.
We've applied for my partnership visa, for my wife's partnership visa in April, and I've lived together with my partner for 6 weeks. I had annual leave. I'd taken 6 weeks of annual leave, and prior to that, during my wedding, I've taken another 4 weeks of annual leave. So in one calendar year, I've taken 10 weeks, and then we've applied in April, and after waiting for 6 months and pretty much asking them on a daily basis, they've finally assigned the case officer in October and declined it right away after an interview call within an hour or two, saying that we haven't lived together.
Okay, so to be clear, you're Indian and you have permanent residence in New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
That is correct. And I have a PhD from University of Canterbury.
Okay, so was this an arranged marriage?
Yes, this was an arranged marriage.
Okay, so apart from the time that you had spent with your wife when you took annual leave, had you lived with her for an extended period of time, which was what the new rules are, wasn't it? So.
Yeah, so the new rules say that the applicant should be living with their partner at the time of assessment, and they should have at least spent 3 to 4 months in living together. So before marriage, the Indian tradition and culture is that you don't get to live together with your partner before you get married, because it's the traditional sort of way, and we only live together when we do get married. So I got married on 21st of January, and since then we've lived together for 6 weeks.
If you were declined, what were your plans? What were your plans now?
So my plans now, I've sent an email to the immigration minister, and I got a reply saying, this is a policy issue from Immigration New Zealand, so if you have any questions, just write a complaint to Immigration New Zealand. So I talked to a lawyer, and the lawyer's advice was pretty kind of to the point. They said, look, you can do, at the end of the day, you can do quite a lot of things, but what matters is me living with my partner. So she advised, if that's what you want to accomplish, you want to go back and refile at some point. So what I'm trying to do now is I've got hold from my employment. I've asked for an extended annual leave for 6 months. I've dissolved my tenancy agreement in New Zealand, and I'm vacating my stuff, and I'm going back to India on this Sunday.
So you are packing everything up because of this immigration decision to go and live with your wife so that you can meet the criteria to get her a visa.
Yep.
What do you make of the news today then that the Prime Minister is asking immigration to reverse this tough stance, to go back to the way it was and consider exemptions?
It's a really good start, at least that the Prime Minister has taken the step of addressing this issue head on. We haven't been hearing from the Labour Party on this issue so far. At least now that we have this, it's good what's going to happen for the new applicants that are coming in. There's a bit of guidance, but I don't think it's quite there yet, because there is no guidance on what happened to the mass rejections that were given out in October in the last month of this year. I know of 300 applications that were rejected based on the same criteria as I have. So we are still in the limbo. I don't know what to do, what my future entails.
So are you going to carry on? Are you going to carry on and go back to India, or are you going to wait and see what happens?
Yeah, I am going back to India because at the end of the day, I want to live with my partner, regardless of me being in New Zealand or India. I want to be with my partner, and I can't wait for another 8 months after having waited for 8 months and then them declining it. So what we want from the government now is a clear answer as to what happens to the people in the situation that I am in right now. So they have declined quite a lot of these applications. Are they going to reassess these applications? Are they going to open these applications again? And if so, how long would it take for them to come back with an answer of decline, or whether they're going to approve it?
A permanent resident there talking to us about his arranged marriage and the difficulty of getting a partnership visa. And just back to that crash that's causing problems at the Terrace Tunnel in Wellington. Police say the tunnel is now open after this afternoon's 2-vehicle crash. They say early indications are a person may have suffered a medical event and they have been taken to hospital. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, how did Winston Peters react when he found out he'd got too much super over some 7 years? A drug cartel and a case of mistaken identity may be behind the deaths of 9 Mormon women and children in an ambush in Mexico. And who's in the hunt for the All Blacks coaching job? We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program today. You can text us on 2101. I'm interested to hear if you think the about turn on the immigration regulations around arranged marriages is the right right move. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to Susanna with the headlines.
The jury in the case of a man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Mallane has heard he took explicit photos of her after she died. In his opening address at the High Court in Auckland, Crown Prosecutor Robin McCoubrae said the accused man, who has name suppression, searched the terms Waitakere Ranges and hottest fire on the internet in the early hours of December the 2nd. It is the Crown's case that Ms Mallane was already dead by this time. The Dunedin doctor accused of murdering a teenage girl suggested to her mother she may have committed suicide. Vernod Scanther is on trial at the High Court in Dunedin for the murder of Amber Rose Rush in February 2018. The Crown says he entered her home using a spare key, smothered her, then stabbed her to death. Mr Scanther's former girlfriend told the court he met Miss Rush's mother 2 days later, where he suggested she had committed suicide. 2 people have died while climbing at the Remarkables near Queenstown. Emergency services were alerted shortly before midday about 2 climbers falling from the side of a cliff. The body of one climber has been recovered and the police are working to recover the other. Immigration New Zealand has been told to reverse its tougher stance on partnership visas. Previous changes by immigration officials insisting couples had to spend time living together to be eligible for partnership visas meant Indians in arranged marriages had a harder time bringing their spouses to New Zealand. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has told officials to go back to giving exemptions to these couples. An Auckland councillor is furious there were 2 massive scrub fires on landmark volcanic cones last night. Maungare Mount Wellington and Maungawhau Mount Eden were set on fire after fireworks went wrong. The City Councillor for the Albert Eden Roskill Ward, Kathy Casey, says the government needs to step up to protect the areas. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for Business with Madison Reedy. Maddie, job stats are out today, so how are we looking in terms of unemployment?
Well, the unemployment rate is now officially over 4%. It's ticked up in the 3 months to September. In that quarter, it's now sitting at 4.2%. Now, that's a rise from the previous June quarter's near the historical low. It was, in fact, an 11-year low of 3.9%. Now, the 4.2% result, that was just over the market expectation of around 4.1%, but actually below the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's own forecast of 4.4%. Now, this result means that more people are out of work, and that's because there's just not enough jobs to go around. So the economy generated jobs at a slower rate in the September quarter than previously, but more people still joined the workforce. So our economy created around 6,000 jobs in the 3-month period, while the number of workers joining the workforce and participating in the workforce grew at nearly twice that rate. Although there was a bright spot when it came to wage growth and wages. So wages in both the public and private sector hit a 10-year high in the September quarter. Now that's because of industrial action, which we've seen plenty of under this government. This is essentially the delayed result of a number of large pay settlements, particularly for nurses, teachers, care workers, and also the police force as well. This is also the result of the continued effect of the increase in the minimum wage too. Now,
so double-edged sword there, just so I've got it clear in my head. If you're in employment, you're likely to be being paid more, but if you're...
Depends on who you're working for.
Yeah, depending on who you're working for, but generally. But if you're in the hunt for a job, there's twice as many people looking for one.
You're out of luck. And also, as we've seen with business confidence, businesses obviously not being so confident in the economy, they're pulling back on their hiring intentions, which has seen business confidence bottom out for a while now. Now, putting all those reckonings together, economists reckon that the unemployment rate, because of especially business confidence, will keep rising. Some have said that they think it'll peak at around 4.5% before falling back down in around 2021.
That's interesting, because I think from memory, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, along. I know you'll text in. Grant Robertson's goal was to keep it around 4% during this term.
Yes, and they very much liked being under 4%.
Yeah, not so now. All right, what can you tell us about Pushpay? So their results are out, half-year result. How are they doing?
Yeah, so Pushpay, they are still in the black. They made a half-year profit of $6.5 million United States dollars. Now that has reversed their previous half-year loss last year of $4.4 million United States dollars. Now, if you don't know much about Pushpay, it sells donation software to both churches and charities in the United States, although it is a New Zealand domiciled company. They listed on the NZX, our stock exchange, in around 2014 and have really been a market darling since then, although it did lose a bit of money last year. Now get this, the figures they announced in their half-year result today. In that just 6-month period, $2.2 billion United States dollars worth of donations to churches and charities went through their software in just 6 months. Now that resulted in their revenue increasing by 30% to $57.5 million United States dollars. They also reversed their earnings from a loss to a gain, as well as reversing their cash flow from a loss to a gain. Their margins increased too, so it's all pretty good times for Pushpay at the moment.
So this is swiping your card rather than them shaking the old plate for a few coins.
Exactly. So rather than, dropping a few coins in the bucket as you leave service on Sunday, you can do it through an app. So they reckon that more churches are going to modernise and go this way, although they are having a bit of a struggle in educating, especially medium to large churches, which are, pretty traditional in their ways, to convince them to go modern.
Interesting. Okay, what else has been going on in the markets today?
Well, actually, the stock exchange had some issues today. All of the NZX markets opened late due to some, as they say, systems issues. But when they did eventually open, that didn't stop investors from profit-taking today. The NZX Top 50 index fell 0.8%, so that's a fall of 82 points to close at 10,759 tonight. Pushpay specifically, their share price actually rose 3.8% to end up at $3.30 tonight. The New Zealand dollar, that was just a little changed by the jobs data today. It's buying at 63.7 US cents, 92.4 to the Australian and 49.5 British pence.
Thank you, Madison Reedy, with the highlights and lowlights from business today. Indignant and defensive, that's how Winston Peters has been described upon learning he'd been paid too much superannuation over some 7 years. The High Court in Auckland today heard from the Ministry of Social Development, with a manager laying bare her actions after discovering the overpayment. The legal action was launched by the New Zealand First Leader, who argues his privacy was breached in the weeks before the 2017 election. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, is covering the case.
Meredith Nugent was an area manager for MSD in 2017 when Winston Peters' pension overpayment first came to light. And it was she who made the phone call to the New Zealand First Leader, notifying him of the error.
He was very unhappy to be having that discussion, and his tone was indignant and defensive. He said it was a ministry error, and the clear undertone was, how dare we contact him about such a thing.
The two arranged to meet in person, where Ms Nugent showed Mr Peters his application form from 2010, in which he had declared he was separated and living apart from his wife. But he did not declare he was in a relationship with Jan Trotman.
Mr Peters again told me that Jan Trotman had been at his initial interview. He also said that people should know who he is and also who she is, because there are always photos of them together and they're at functions.
Ms Nugent told the court she concluded Mr Peters had made an innocent mistake, that there was no intention to mislead or defraud the ministry.
He seemed legitimately surprised.
And Mr Peters agreed to pay the money back. Once a number was calculated, nearly $18,000, it was left to Ms Nugent again to make the phone call.
When I said who I was, he nearly bit my head off, because he thought that I was a media person and he'd forgotten my name.
Mr Peters' privacy case centres on what happens next, how news of the overpayment made its way to the media in the heat of the 2017 election campaign.
We did everything humanly possible to ensure that the overpayment was kept confidential.
And yet some journalists were tipped off by an anonymous source. 3 reporters were subpoenaed by Mr Peters' lawyer, Brian Henry, but none revealed identifying details.
Are you prepared to name the sources?
No. I'm not willing to give any information that might reveal the identity of the source.
Did the person identify themselves to you?
No.
Ms Nugent told the court she felt sick when she saw the story online.
You felt sick because you knew that Somehow in your department, Mr. Peters had been let down, didn't you?
No.
She went on.
I had no reason to understand how that information had made its way to the media.
Mr. Peters argues that ministry officials and the State Services Commissioner should never have briefed their ministers, his political opponents, about the overpayment, as it increased the risk of a leak. Tomorrow, those MPs, Nationals Paula Bennett and Anne Tolley, will give evidence in their defence. From Auckland for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
There are 26 in the race, all Kiwis and 4 among the favourites. No, it's not the Melbourne Cup rerun, but the race to become the next All Blacks coach. The All Blacks touched down in Auckland yesterday, formally ending the rugby year, with players heading off with family and friends for the summer. And when they meet next, it will be under the regime of someone completely new. Alex Perrottet has the form guide.
The story will build to a crescendo over the next few weeks, so there's going to be speculation everywhere, and pretty well every rugby journalist in the country has already speculated as to who they believe the next All Black coach should be, so I'm expecting there to be more of it.
New Zealand Rugby chairman Brent Impey today said the field is wide and he's been proactive, writing to all 26, asking them to throw their hat in the ring.
International coaches, current New Zealand rugby coaches, whether they be the All Blacks, our super teams, they're coaching in clubs overseas.
But while some are coaching overseas, he confirmed there's no foreigners considered for the role. Here's the form guide. Scott Razor Robinson, a former All Black and a coach since 2008, he's won 3 Super Rugby titles in a row and has hinted he's keen for the job.
The All Blacks, still the kings of world rugby. Is this the greatest ever era?
Ian Fozzie Foster, described as the greatest player to never pull on an All Blacks jersey. He played for the Waikato Chiefs and coached them for 8 years, but didn't make a final. He went on to become Steve Hanson's assistant coach, winning the 2015 World Cup final.
And it's going into touch, and the Chiefs are the champions in 2012.
Dave Rennie, who played a game for the Cook Islands, took over from Ian Foster as coach of the Chiefs and immediately won 2 titles in a row. Since 2017, he's been with the Glasgow Warriors, who've come runners-up in the last 2 years.
Pandemonium! The Rugby World Cup has an Asian quarter-finalist for the first time, and Japan have done it at the expense of Scotland.
And then there's Jamie Joseph, a former All Black who also played for New Zealand Māori and Japan. He won a Super Rugby title with the Highlanders and has coached Japan since 2016, pulling off historic wins in this year's World Cup against Ireland and Scotland. He's also been bolstered in the last 24 hours with his long-running assistant coach Tony Brown pledging his loyalty as his running mate for the All Blacks job and turning down approaches from both Ian Foster and Scott Robertson. So who will choose the next coach? Here's the selection panel. Brent Impey himself, the incoming NZR Chief Executive Mark Robinson, NZR's Head of High Performance Mike Anthony, former All Blacks head coach Sir Graham Henry, and someone with an outside perspective, former Silver Ferns coach Waimarama Taumonu. Brent Impey says he doesn't want it to be a boys' club and hence the inclusion of Taumonu.
What Y brings is no connection with rugby, but has been a top coach and works in for high performance sport New Zealand. So that brings a different perspective and also that diversity side of it.
Impey says current Chief Executive Steve Chu was welcome to be part of the process, but he's keeping out of it as he's on the way out as well. But Chu did have something to say in response to Sonny Bill Williams' view that it's time for a Māori or Pacifica coach.
We've got a program of work growing the leadership, particularly in our Pacifica and Māori communities, and coaches are a very big part of that. So, there are candidates now that might fit that bill. That's for the panel to decide and then the board, but certainly we're working hard at the community level to grow that level of expertise.
So what does Steve Hansen think? He's backing his assistant Ian Foster for the top job.
He's a very intelligent rugby man. He understands the game really, really well. He's got a great rapport with the players. He's got a great understanding of what goes on in the All Blacks now after being there for 8 years. So I've got no doubt that continuity is one of the reasons why we've been successful.
And Hansen's view also endorsed by halfback TJ Perenara.
Fozzie's a great man, very, very good coach, and he brings the elements that he coaches, he brings a lot of flair in that to the game as well. So We've done a lot of work over the last few years together, and Foz has done a great job.
There's not a lot of wriggle room at the front of the pack, but Impey says there is wriggle room with his Christmas deadline, with the All Blacks only regrouping before the July 2020 games against Wales and Scotland. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
It's about 17 away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know who you think the new All Blacks coach should be. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Suspected drug cartel gunmen have killed 9 Mormon women and children in a horrific ambush in northern Mexico. A video posted on social media showed the smoking remains of a vehicle riddled with bullet holes that was apparently carrying the victims on a dirt road when the attack occurred. Zachary Goldman has the story, and just a warning, some of the details and pictures in his report may be disturbing.
The horrific murders of 9 members of an American family in Mexico prompted outrage in Washington and calls by President Donald Trump for Mexico to wage war on drug cartels. Cell phone footage of a charred and bullet-riddled car purports to show the scene where 3 adults and 6 children, members of the LeBaron family, were attacked by unknown gunmen. An unidentified voice chokes up at the tragedy.
This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
Reuters could not independently verify the video. President Donald Trump tweeted, "A wonderful family and friends from Utah got caught between 2 vicious drug cartels who were shooting at each other, with the result being many great American people killed, including young children and some missing." Trump also wrote, "This is the time for Mexico, with the help of the United States, to wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth." Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said he grieved for the victims.
I send an embrace of condolence to the whole LeBaron family, to the family members of the victims. This is a terrible tragedy because children and innocents lost their lives.
López Obrador also thanked Trump for his support, but said he didn't think Mexico needed foreign intervention at this time.
It's a great tragedy.
Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah expressed his concerns about the attack.
I agree with the president when he says Mexico has to really knuckle down and go after some of these cartels and stop this escalating level of violence, and hope that if there's a way we can help in that effort, that we're called upon to do so.
Romney is a member of the Mormon faith. The victims in Mexico were members of a breakaway Mormon group that settled in Mexico's Chihuahua state in the 1920s. A family relative called the incident a massacre and said some family members were burned alive, telling Reuters he did not know why they were attacked, but the group had had run-ins with the drug cartels before. For more than a decade, Mexico has deployed its military to combat organized crime. The result has been less than successful. Killings by the cartels have spiked. Mexico registered nearly 250,000 homicides in the last 12 years, many linked to the drug war.
Zachary Goldman reporting. More than 11,000 scientists from around the world have put their names to a statement today declaring a climate emergency and calling on leaders to make urgent changes to prevent the worst effects of climate change. In their statement, the group says the climate crisis has now arrived, and with it, a significant threat to the future of humankind. But they're also saying there is still time to avert a catastrophe and suggesting a new way to track the causes and effects of climate change. The ABC's Michael Slezak reports.
The UK government has declared a climate and environment emergency.
As climate change bites, governments are declaring emergencies.
Scotland has declared a global climate emergency.
The world now, Mr Deputy Speaker, is facing a climate emergency.
A claim now backed by thousands of scientists. In the journal Bioscience, 11,263 scientists have put their names to a paper entitled World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency. Professor William Ripple, an ecologist from Oregon State University, organised the warning.
There are many cities in the world that have declared climate emergencies. Our statement about a climate emergency might help give backing to policymakers that want to do the same.
It includes scientists from institutions like the CSIRO and Oxford University, as well as others in Estonia, Zimbabwe and Uruguay. All up, scientists from 153 countries have put their name to the paper. Is this science or is it activism?
The key here is that it's evidence-based and science-based.
Does the science say that we are in a climate emergency?
Well, that's a judgment call. The consensus of our group is, yes, we are in one.
The scientists point to 29 vital signs, 15 measures of human impacts that affect the climate, like forest cover and livestock populations, as well as 14 climatic responses, like sea level change and ocean acidity. Dr. Thomas Newsom, an ecologist at the University of Sydney, is another of the lead authors on the paper. He says these indicators should become part of the public discussion, broadening the discussion beyond just greenhouse gas concentrations and temperature changes.
Governments at their own country level should actually be reporting this data back to the public so that we can track progress over time.
The scientists also call for 6 actions, including shifting to renewable energy and moving to plant-based diets.
We are calling for transformative change by humanity.
A group called the Alliance of World Scientists organised the declaration. It's not their first warning.
So in 2017, we published the World Scientists Warning to Humanity. But over the last 2 years, the news and the science on climate change has been getting more severe, and the climate has been changing faster than most predicted. So what we felt the need to do now is put out a very specific warning with vital signs on a climate emergency.
Dr. Newsom says the Alliance of World Scientists is a grassroots movement. Its website describes actions people can take, including joining the more radical movement, Extinction Rebellion. Do you have concerns that that might marginalise the group?
Potentially, but I think this really gets back to the point that people have been, and very well-respected scientists have been telling governments and the general public that we have a problem, and governments have failed to act.
And that was Dr. Thomas Newsom from Sydney University ending that report. 2 big scrub fires on Auckland's volcanic cones are the last straw for the authority overseeing them, which has banned people from accessing the Maunga during the 4 days fireworks are on sale. Maungarai, Mount Wellington and Maunga Fo, Mount Eden, were lit up with flames last night after 2 fireworks incidents. The blazes were among the 88 fireworks-related call-outs that Fire and Emergency attended across the country last night, 30 more than last year. It's renewed calls for a ban on public fireworks sales. The Tupuna Maunga Authority says until that happens, the 14 Maunga across the city will remain off limits during Guy Fawkes. Jessie Chang reports.
Fireworks are already banned in Auckland city parks and reserves, and there are signs at the entrance to each moanga reminding people not to set them off. Despite the warnings, the Tupuna Maunga Authority says there have been repeated fires on the summits during Guy Fawkes. Auckland Council has been working to get the government to ban the public sale of fireworks following strong feedback from residents that they've had enough. Councillor for the Albert Eden Roskill Ward, Kathy Casey, says the ban from the Maunga summits is an unfortunate necessity.
If the government can't support a ban on the private sale and use of fireworks, we are not doing everything we can to protect these sacred places, and that's been shown last night with Maungarai and Maunga Fo. Those fires are just, it leaves me speechless with rage, because it can be prevented.
Local group Friends of Maunga Fo has been looking after the mountain for close to 3 decades. Its chairman Sal Arbuckle says there has long been mischief on the mountain, but it's sad to be closing the summit at Guy Fawkes.
It's the usual situation that the actions of a few impinge on the many, and probably there are a lot of people who'd like to just go up the hill on Guy Fawkes to watch the fireworks around the city.
Mr Arbuckle says the city's moanga need to be treated with respect.
Everything that has been happening in recent years, the removal of grazing cattle and removal first of buses and then of cars from the mountain, is part of a larger movement to shift a perception from just a place of recreation to a place with a historical significance.
Mr Arbuckle hopes the ban on people accessing the summits at Guy Fawkes will be short-lived.
I hope that in future years it'll be possible to keep the summit open, but to have someone up there to make sure that things don't get out of hand.
The Tupuna Maunga Authority says it has yet to work out the logistics for how it will keep people off the summits at Guy Fawkes, but the ban will be in place until fireworks are no longer sold to the public. But despite widespread calls for the government to step in and stop those sales, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's not something they're looking at.
There are a number of people that use them safely and for fun. There are others who have other concerns. So I think we need to take all of those factors into consideration. There's nothing planned at the moment, though, and nothing on the agenda for change.
Fire and Emergency says it has attended 135 fireworks-related incidents since they went on sale on Saturday. Councillor Kathy Casey will travel to Wellington next week to make a case for banning fireworks before the Governance and Administration Select Committee. She says she hopes the government will act swiftly to make sure they're out of public hands in time for Guy Fawkes next year. I tamaki makaurau o te hōtaka o te ahi nei ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
The first fire safety program in Te Reo for children is significantly reducing the number of emergency call-outs in one of Napier's most vulnerable suburbs. Developed by a local firefighter, it aims to reduce the high number of avoidable accidents and hospitalisations among Māori children. It was introduced at Marae Nui Bilingual School in April, and 6 months later, data from Fire and Emergency shows it's having a positive impact on the whole community. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley with the story.
Emergency call-outs to Marae Nui have reduced by up to 15% over the last 6 months, and there are now significantly fewer building fires. The creator of the Te Kōtuku Bilingual Risk Reduction Program, Hastings Fire Officer Alan Brown, says the data shows its message is not only reaching students, but their caregivers as well.
So those are good indicators that the program in Marae Nui is successful. So we know that through a kaupapa Māori program that it gives value, and value is important. If you give value to mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge, if you give value to a Māori community, then of course you give value to Māori lives.
The program, funded by the Māori Language Commission, uses books and videos in Te Reo Māori and English, covering topics such as road safety, wearing seatbelts and cooking in the kitchen. The assistant principal at Marae Nui Bilingual School, Maya Wilcox, says it's been eagerly adopted by its community and it could not have come at a better time.
So we wanted the tamariki to all have a discussion with their whānau about what their home safety plan was, where they would meet in the event of a fire at home. And because one of our whānau had a house fire, an electrical fault, it was really relevant for a lot of the tamariki in our whānau. So they'd also seen a house on fire down the road with the fire service arriving. So parents were really engaged in that conversation.
Napier Fire Station Officer Mike Manning says call-out data has also enabled them to identify the most at-risk streets in Marae Nui, and free smoke alarms and fire risk assessments are now being offered to these residents.
So we'd much rather be doing risk reduction work and engaging in those softer skills areas with our community than having to do the hard skills of putting out their fires or dealing with the consequence of the fires.
Alan Brown says there are huge benefits for firefighters too in this prevention-focused approach.
Our exposure to trauma decreases. PTSD is less impacted upon. Some of the older buildings that we've gone to, the fires have carcinogen products in them. So our exposure to cancer is reduced.
Alan Brown says they'll continue tracking progress in Marae Nui, and he hopes to roll his safety program out to a Gisborne school soon and eventually nationwide. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's time to get to some of your feedback now on the government U-turn on arranged marriages. This is the partnership visas, which there was a toughened stance on. Helen says, I think arranged marriage should be accepted like any other marriage. It's a matter of culture and we expect people to respect ours. Thanks for getting in touch, Helen. And this one here says, whilst our Indian friends wanting to undergo arranged marriages are jumping up and down about timelines, timelines with immigration, etc., there are many, many others from around the world also awaiting their immigration status here. They ask for no special requests, requirements or shortcuts, yet remain steadfast in their jobs, paying taxes and doing it all by the book. The real question is, why does one cultural practice override another? 8 months, as per your Checkpoint interview, is not, in the scheme of immigration timelines, a long time. And this person, Pam, it is, who's got in touch from Nelson. Pam says, hooray for Ms. Ardern reversing the latest inhumane anti-immigrant law. The couples already sent back should be allowed to stay in New Zealand, as that's what they were told. Other immigrants have also been told to leave after working here for years on work visas and being told it would lead to permanent residence. Thanks, Pam. Keep your views coming on that. Interested to see what you think. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. You can also get in touch about anything else that you've heard on the program today. Also, this on Winston Peters' lawsuit, in essence, about his alleged privacy breach over his superannuation overpayment. This person, Mark from Kaikoi, says, as champion of the elderly, Winston knows how much a single person's pension is. So for all that time, he didn't think, geez, I'm getting more than $400 a week for the pension when he checks his finances. Hope he's more careful when he's in charge of the public purse, this person says. I know I'd know if an extra $120 a fortnight was going into my account or whatever it is. And we're getting more here from Brendan saying, shocking to find out that New Zealand assists in the practice of arranged marriages.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The Crown says the 27-year-old man accused of murdering Grace Millane took explicit photos of her body after she died. Ms Millane's body was found in a suitcase, buried in a shallow grave in the Waitakere Ranges. In his opening address at the High Court in Auckland, the prosecutor, Robin McCoubrae, said the accused man's internet history shows he looked up Waitakere Ranges in the early hours of December the 2nd. The Crown maintains Ms Millane was dead by then, and the man watched pornography and took photos of her body. Mr McCoubrae says the accused later went out and bought a large suitcase, cleaning products and hired a car. He says those actions show Ms Millane's death was not an accident. But the defence lawyer says Grace Millane's death was the unforeseen and unintended consequence of consensual sexual activity. In his brief opening statement, Ian Brookie said Ms Millane consented to his client restricting her breathing when they had sex.
Ms Millane's death occurred during a perfectly ordinary, casual, sexual encounter between a young couple who had met up through Tinder, had a Saturday night out drinking together. They were enjoying each other's company.
Ian Brookie, the lawyer for the man accused of murdering British tourist Grace Millane last December. The Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister continue to be at odds over the rules on partnership visas that have upset the Indian community. A change in approach by immigration officials insisting couples have to spend time living together in order to be eligible has meant people in arranged marriages are having a much harder time bringing their spouses to the country. The government has now told the Immigration Department to reverse that stance. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters has continued to claim credit for the tougher line, but the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that's not what happened.
That was changed as a result of Immigration New Zealand officials changing the way they were operating. They did not do that under the authority of Cabinet. My expectation is that we'll reverse back to the status quo in the way it was operating before.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. 2 people have died when they fell from a cliff while climbing at the Remarkables near Queenstown. The police say the pair were on the popular Grand Traverse, a single-day route which has a steep and exposed ridgeline. RNZ understands the business involved is a Wanaka-based climbing company, Aspiring Guides. The company says it can't confirm it is involved, but staff are assisting with the police investigation. A person is in a critical condition after an explosion in a workplace in Littleton near Christchurch this afternoon. 2 ambulances were called to a Cash and Key property about 3:20 and took the person to Christchurch Hospital. The police say they sustained burns. WorkSafe has been notified. The man who assaulted the Green Party co-leader James Shaw has been sentenced to 9 months in prison. Paul Raymond Harris, who's 47, was found guilty in May of punching Mr Shaw repeatedly in the head as the MP walked to work. His lawyer has indicated it is likely Harris will apply for home detention. The impact on the families of Māori women in prison has been outlined to the Royal Commission on Abuse in Care. 63% of women in jail are Māori, while 51% of men are Māori. Indigenous Studies Professor at Auckland University, Tracy McIntosh, says the number of Māori women in prison has grown dramatically over the last 10 years. She says the impact on their children is more immediate than when the father is in jail.
Women are much more likely to be the sole carers or the primary carers of children. And so on an arrest, for example, it is much more likely that there will be disruption for those children immediately. It's much more likely that they will be uplifted.
Professor McIntosh says a high number of Māori prisoners have grown up in state care as young people. A former quality control engineer at Boeing has claimed passengers on the new 787 Dreamliner aircraft could be left without oxygen if the plane's cabin suffers a sudden decompression. It's one of a number of allegations made by John Barnett, who is questioning the safety standards at Boeing. The BBC's Theo Leggett has the details.
John Barnett worked at a Boeing factory in South Carolina until his retirement 2 years ago. The plant produces the 787 Dreamliner. He claims he discovered problems with emergency oxygen systems on the aircraft, which are meant to ensure those aboard can breathe if the cabin loses pressure at altitude. Mr. Barnett says he found up to a quarter of them could be faulty. He says he reported his findings to Boeing, but nothing was done. It's one of a number of allegations he's made about safety failings at the plant, which he blames on a management approach that was focused on making planes quickly. Boeing says it did identify some faulty oxygen bottles, which were removed from production and none was placed on an aircraft.
Theo Leggett reporting. The government is investing in a new project to measure the Earth's methane emissions from space. The New Zealand Space Agency is investing $26 million in a partnership with the United States-based NGO, the Environmental Defence Fund, to launch a methane measuring satellite in 2022. Research, Science and Innovation Minister Megan Woods says local scientists will be looking at how agricultural emissions in particular could be measured.
Most of the world's methane emissions are from the oil and gas sector, but we do know that as we curb those, the agricultural and biological methane emissions will become even more important for the world to consider how they cut those. So New Zealand scientists will be able to bring that expertise that we have around biological methane emissions.
Megan Woods says the satellite will provide the data to track and reduce those emissions. It's 6:06. New Zealand Rugby says it has identified 26 homegrown coaches to possibly replace outgoing All Blacks boss Steve Hansen. The chair of New Zealand Rugby, Brent Impey, says the organisation has approached the coaches as it's not a job you simply advertise online. The All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster has put his hand up, while former Wales coach Warren Gatland and Japan coach Jamie Joseph are also potential successors. In netball, defending champions the Pulse will begin their title defence in next year's ANZ Netball Premiership on the road against the Tactics in Blenheim. The season will start on March the 15th with the Northern Stars hosting the Mystics on the same day. The new schedule will see 2 games played on Sundays and 1 on Mondays. The New Zealand Breakers basketball coach Dan Shamir is confident he can get the best out of Firebrand recruit Glenn Rice Jr. Rice, a former Washington Wizards guard in the NBA, will temporarily replace the injured Scotty Hopson at the Breakers and could play as early as tomorrow night against Melbourne United. Rice played under Shamir in Israel, but was axed after reportedly punching a teammate in the face. In cycling, Mexican rider Eder Freire has won the 4th stage of the Tour of Southland and also grabbed the leader's jersey to sit 28 seconds ahead of Southland's Corbin Strong. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Chris Harris from the New Zealand Holocaust Centre on remembering Kristallnacht 81 years ago this month, with a concert that also recognises the March 15 terror attack on this country's Muslim community. Simon Morris is back in the movies, but is Arnie back on form in Terminator 4? And Canterbury University's Susan Krumdiek on engineering ourselves out of fossil fuel dependency on nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the northern half of the North Island, from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty, mainly fine and warm with high cloud, but areas of low cloud and drizzle developing in Northland tonight, then spreading everywhere tomorrow evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, mainly fine and warm with high cloud and the chance of a shower. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, mostly cloudy, scattered rain tomorrow evening. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods, patchy rain or drizzle in the afternoons and evenings. For Bulla and Westland, periods of rain, heavy about the ranges. Canterbury, mostly cloudy with scattered rain. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, isolated showers mostly inland, turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow night. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, light rain tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for joining us. This is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. What really happened the night Grace Millane died? The Crown alleges she was strangled and put in a suitcase before her accused murderer went out on a Tinder date. The defence says her death was an accident after an ordinary sexual encounter. Today at the High Court in Auckland, Grace Millane's family came face to face for the first time with the 27-year-old man on trial for her murder in December last year. Our reporter Sarah Robson is covering the case, and she's in the studio with me now. Kia ora, Sarah. So, a big first day of the trial today. What happened?
So for the first time in court today, we've actually heard the Crown's case against the 27-year-old man who is accused of murdering Ms Millane. Now that includes details about what happened immediately after her death. Crown lawyer Robin McCoubrey spent about an hour laying this all out to the jury of 7 women and 5 men this morning. He explained to the court that Ms Millane and the man had met on Tinder, and there's lots of CCTV footage from around the central city of them bar hopping from bar to bar on a Saturday night Tinder date. Now this is on the 1st of December, the eve of Ms Millane's 22nd birthday. Robin McCoubrey explained that the pair went back to the accused man's apartment at the City Life Hotel at about 9:30 that night, and there is CCTV footage of her entering the building. Now here's where we get to where the accounts start differing. The court heard that the accused man had initially told the police that he had met up with Ms Millane for a drink and they had parted company. He then changed his story to the police and said that they did go back to his apartment. The Crown said that he had told police they'd had rough sex, and he went to have a shower and he fell asleep. He had told the police that when he woke up, he found Ms Millane dead on the floor. But the Crown argues otherwise. Robin McCoubrey said that if it might be expected that the accused man would call for help or seek help from the emergency services if he had found Ms Millane's body. But instead, the Crown says that in the early hours of the morning, the man did a couple of Google searches. They were the terms Waitakere Ranges and hottest fire. The implication being that the Crown argues that Ms Millane was already dead and the accused man was working out how to hide and dispose of her body. The Crown also argues that he had watched pornography and that he had taken explicit photos of her body. Now, Robin McCoubrey said that a pathologist will give evidence for the Crown that the cause of Ms Millane's death was pressure applied to her neck. The court jury also heard details about the accused man going off to buy a large suitcase, cleaning products and organising the hire of a rental car. The Crown said that the man contorted Ms Millane's body into that suitcase, left it in his apartment while he went off on another Tinder date. Now, the Crown said that this behaviour doesn't seem to be the man was concerned about there being a dead body in his apartment, and there will be CCTV footage shown to the jury at some point of the man wheeling that suitcase with Ms Mullane's body inside it to the hire car, and it was then taken to the Waitakere Ranges where he buried it.
So the Crown gets to outline what is its opening address, the outline of its case. The defence, did they take the opportunity to say something?
Yes, the accused man's lawyer, Ian Brookie, did make an opening statement to the jury, and his case is that Ms Mullane's death was an accident. He said it was the unforeseen and unintended consequence of a perfectly ordinary casual sexual encounter between two young people. Now, Mr Brookie said that his client had restricted Ms Mullane's breathing by applying pressure to her neck, but Mr Brookie said that the accused man did this with her consent. He did emphasise that Ms Mullane was not to blame here, but her death was an accident, and he insists that his client did not murder her.
So, what evidence have they managed to get through so far, and what are we expecting?
Yeah, the Crown is expecting to call 40 witnesses in its case, and the first evidence we heard today was actually from Grace Mullane's father, David. Now, David and his wife, Gillian Mullane, have come over from the UK for the court trial. Today was the first day that they had actually been in court, and they were sitting front and centre of a very packed public gallery in court today. Now, Mr Mullane didn't actually appear in the dock to give his evidence. It was actually read out by the Crown prosecutor, Robin McCoubry, which is a fairly standard practice in a court case like this if there's no dispute around the evidence. In his evidence, Mr Mullane talked about his daughter, or Gracie, as his family referred to her as. He said that she was a gregarious and outgoing young woman, well-liked. She had been keeping them up to date with her travels, and she seemed to be having a great time. And obviously, alarm bells rang when they hadn't heard from her for her birthday on the 2nd of December. As Mr Mullane was talking about the close relationship that his daughter had with his wife, Gillian Mullane began crying in the public gallery and was wiping away tears. So it was a very highly charged and emotional giving of evidence today. We've also heard from 2 police officers so far. Now, one of those police officers is the one who actually found the suitcase in the Waitakere Ranges in a shallow grave that contained Ms Mullane's body. Tomorrow, the jury is expecting to begin watching some of that CCTV footage that the Crown has already alluded to in its opening statement.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah Robson there, who is covering the murder trial into the death of Grace Mullane, and we will be keeping across that case, which is expected to run for some weeks. Victims of the country's largest Ponzi scheme are angry that proposed insolvency law reforms have been shelved, leaving future investors vulnerable. In May of last year, the Commerce Minister, Chris Whaafoe, hinted giving liquidators the power to take back more money for those who lost everything. But there is no mention of Ponzi-specific policy in the latest list of changes, leaving former victims furious. Our Christchurch reporter, Nicholas Poynton, has the story.
Bruce Titchman was among those who lost money in New Zealand's largest ever Ponzi scheme when Ross Asset Management collapsed in 2012. He now represents the hundreds of other investors who lost close to $100 million. He's frustrated the government has decided to not specifically target Ponzi schemes.
We were promised Ponzi-specific legislation that was very crisp, very clear, very fair, and would have provided a very, very quick settlement.
He says this leaves small investors vulnerable in a market he describes as the Wild West.
It is just completely unsatisfactory, and with proper regulation and environment that focuses on the human needs of investors, not the best interests of liquidators and lawyers.
The Commerce Minister, Chris Whaafoe, says addressing Ponzi schemes would have held up the other fixes to insolvency law.
Well, certainly the Ponzi scheme policy area is extremely complex. So I apologise to Mr Titchman that we weren't able to get it out in the time frame that he wanted to with the measures that we've already announced. But they were much easier to get through. As I say, we can still continue to look at the Ponzi schemes. They will take a lot more time than the other insolvency issues that we've dealt with.
Victoria University law lecturer Victoria Stace says it's sensible for the government to make straightforward changes now. She says Ponzi schemes are incredibly complex and finding the best way to legislate against them will take time.
It might be that insolvency law is not the place to deal with it, that it might be better dealt with in some respect through the Financial Markets Conduct Act, for example, in particular because of the fraudulent aspect of the management of the scheme.
The changes will be included in the Insolvency Law Reform Bill. For Checkpoint, Nicholas Poynton.
It's almost 18 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're getting quite a bit of feedback on the issue of immigration partnership visas for people in arranged marriages. I was just mentioning before Brendan from Banks Peninsula, who sent quite a lengthy email, I think it is, who said it's shocking to find out that New Zealand assists in the practice of arranged marriages, and even worse, that the country makes an exception to immigration rules applied to all other countries to assist in this matter even further. How does a practice where a young woman, often a teenager, gets told by two sets of parents who she will marry without any consultation fit in with New Zealand culture or its values? What next? We will recognise hands being cut off for theft or stoning adulterers in our streets because it is some other country's culture. The Prime Minister might have got back some votes, but she has lost this one. Thanks for getting in touch, and do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. And while work is underway to lower methane emissions at the farm gate, the government is also investing in a new project to measure emissions from the final frontier. The New Zealand Space Agency is partnering with the United States-based NGO, the Environmental Defence Fund, to launch a satellite into space to measure methane emissions in its first official space mission. The government's stumping up $26 million towards the project. Political reporter Charlie Drever was at the announcement at the Carter Observatory in Wellington this afternoon and filed this report.
The Minister of Research, Science and Innovation, Megan Woods, says the methane sat will be unlike any other before it.
We have methane satellites that do one of two things. Either they measure over a very large geographic area, or they focus on a very predetermined target. What this methane satellite does is both things at once. So the kind of data that we'll be getting is unique and will be absolutely instrumental in the world cutting methane emissions.
Megan Woods says as part of the government's investment into the project, local scientists will be looking at how to measure agricultural emissions.
Most of the world's methane emissions are from the oil and gas sector, but we do know that as we curb those, the agricultural and biological methane emissions will become even more important for the world to consider how they cut those. So New Zealand scientists will be able to bring that expertise that we have around biological methane emissions.
The goal is to use the information to lower emissions. The satellite will be too big to launch here, but the head of the New Zealand Space Agency, Dr. Peter Crabtree, says the mission control will be based in New Zealand.
That will allow undergraduate and graduate students to be exposed both in terms of science users and as engineers and understanding how space missions are run. And that, internationally the experience has been these types of facilities are absolutely critical for those types of programs about people development.
There are still a lot of questions around what the final outcome for the project will be, but Peter Crabtree says the goal will be to make the data as open and transparent as possible.
Part of that will be to make it as interpretable as possible. So there's sort of layers. This is classic data science type questions where you've got the raw data and then you've got to be able to interpret that data. There's a lot of science in there, but there's also a lot of how do you represent that and how do you make it? How do you put it in forms where, if I was a farmer and I was wanting to track those things theoretically, I'd be able to just pull that up.
The exact location of the Mission Control Centre and New Zealand's role in the launch will be confirmed in the coming months before the project takes off in 2022. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
No one will be allowed onto Auckland's Maunga around fireworks season following two large fires last night. The blaze at Maungarei, Mount Wellington, was the biggest fire crews have ever tackled during the annual fireworks season, while another at Maungawhau, Mount Eden, was contained to the crater. Auckland's Tupuna Maunga Authority says it will now block access to Auckland's 14 Maunga during the time crackers are on sale. Our camerawoman Claire Easton-Farrelly and reporter Nita Blake-Person headed to Maungawhau to speak to the authority's manager, Nick Tudor, and survey the damage.
Obviously, we've just come across the extent of the fire damage caused by last night's fireworks. So it's roughly 50 metres by 100 metres of burnt grassland inside the crater being, the most sacred and protected site on the Maunga.
Pretty devastating to look at?
Yeah, it is really devastating. This is our most sacred site of the Maunga. This is, a place of significant cultural and historical significance to Ngā Mana Whenua Tāmaki Makaurau, the 13 iwi that own this Maunga, and to the Tupuna Maunga Authority that administer this Maunga. So, yeah, it is really devastating to see. Obviously, we try to make sure that this place is well protected, but also, this is a public space where people are, and so by lighting fireworks on a site like this, you're actually taking in lives, property, and these sacred places into risk.
You're saying enough is enough and there will be no more public access to these Maunga as of next year?
So during fireworks season, while fireworks are on sale, we will be making sure that no one can come up here during those times. Yes, enough is enough. This is a repeated situation on Maunga. So last night we obviously had 2 fires, one here, a large one on Maungarai, Mount Wellington. So yeah, we can only do what's in our control in terms of making sure that we're keeping people safe and we're keeping our Maunga safe for the generations to come.
You say that the Maunga will be closed to the public during fireworks season. That's just the 2nd to the 5th?
Look, we're still working through, obviously last night this happened. What I can say is that over the last this fireworks season, we've ramped up security patrols on the Maunga. We've made sure that we've had signage all around the Maunga. We've tried to have presence on the Maunga as much as possible. The only option left to us now is to actually look at making sure that there's no one on the Maunga during those times, so that we can actually just make sure that this type of incident doesn't occur again.
And so I guess even if it is just over that fireworks season, there's nothing stopping people stockpiling public sales. They can do whatever they want year round. What would be your message? How would you like to see that resolved at maybe a legislation level?
That's not in the Tāmaki or in the Maunga Authority's remit. We're here. Our purpose is to look after the tupuna Maunga. Obviously, the council have put a wider ban on lighting fireworks on public spaces, and that is in the hand of the central government.
Do you think that they didn't know and that this was a malicious kind of act?
I can't really speculate on what people's thoughts are at the time, but I do think that we've gone out of our way as the Tupuna Maunga Authority to get the message out there, as has the wider Auckland Council.
And that was Nick Turoa of the Tupuna Maunga Authority speaking to our reporter Nita Blake-Person. And I have to say, the Maunga hasn't looked so great in a long time. Not a breath of wind there during that interview. Signed, sealed and delivered. That's the big news for Australia's top female soccer players today, with a deal finalised to ensure the Matildas receive the same pay as their male counterparts, the Socceroos. The move finally catches up with a similar deal made on this side of the Tasman last year. And the women who've played in the green and gold say it paves the way for a new era of success. The ABC's David Sparks reports.
Equality for the Matildas has been a long time coming. Sarah Walsh understands that better than most, having played 70 games for the national team and now working as the FFA's head of game development.
It's hard to not be sentimental about today because it's a massive moment for football, and I think about the 203 Matildas who've worn a jersey. I think that this is a moment for them to be very proud about their contribution up until this point.
This new 4-year collective bargaining agreement will see the Socceroos and Matildas players receive a 24% share of revenue, rising by 1% each year. John Didalitza is Chief Executive of the Professional Footballers Association.
Any Tier 1 Matilda, before they step foot on the park, will be paid $100,000 per year. It's a wonderful step forward for the game and a strong demonstration of how committed we are to making football the sport of choice for young women across Australia.
And it's not just about the players' salaries.
That extends to business class travel, that extends to the coaching staff that's in place to support the Matildas. All the other bells and whistles that we've historically aligned with the Socceroos will now be extended to the Matildas.
Current Matilda player Elise Kellon-Knight says the new arrangement means hard-working female players will get the recognition they deserve.
As a female footballer, it's kind of what we've always dreamed of. We've always wanted to be treated equal. We wanted to be able to step out on that pitch with equal opportunity and the equal facilities that the men have been exposed to. So I think as a player, the new CBA shows signs of respect. Now we're going to be completely included, and also opportunity.
The new contract system for both sexes is complicated and is based on a tiered system. The players' share of prize money from the World Cup and Asian Cup has been increased, and the parental leave policy will also be upgraded to support Matildas during and after pregnancy. While this deal establishes equality between the men and the women playing for the national teams, there is still a big gap between what they earn playing for their clubs. Bridie O'Donnell is Director of the Victorian Office for Women in Sport and Recreation.
It is equal, but one thing that needs to be explored further is how that impacts salaries, as they said, around clubs. There's a big disparity between what W League and A League players do receive. So even if you are a Tier 1 Matildas player, you may be on a much lower contract for your W League contract payments than your commensurate sort of Socceroo player who's playing for his A League.
The male and female players have committed to putting a portion of their share of the revenue into the national youth teams.
And that's David Sparks with that report. We're getting a lot of feedback. It's pouring in tonight on the issue of arranged marriages and the immigration rules. Alan has got in touch and says visas and arranged marriages. If arranged marriages are an acceptable threshold for immigration entry, then arrangers should be identifiable and accountable for those marriages enduring for at least a year. A year being the shortcut that people arranging the marriages or with arranged marriages want over everyone else, says Alan. This one, arranged marriages, is a cultural practice that needs to be placed in the dustbin of history. Just because it's culture doesn't make it acceptable. It has been the smashing of culture that has given us women's rights, workers' rights and LGBT rights et al., says this person. Chris has got in touch to say the immigration U-turn, the one good thing that Labor has done, and now they want to change it, says Chris, followed by a few exclamation marks. This one says arranged marriages, presumably same criteria would be applied to any couple who meet online and have only spent short periods of time together before the partner wants to move to New Zealand, or for that matter, any other newly married couple who have not lived together. It does not seem right to put an ethnicity criteria attached to the decision. As a follow-on, I guess the question is how you avoid selling marriage to get a New Zealand passport. Gary says, I agree with Shane Jones. Our laws, our way. On the topic of the head coach for the All Blacks, someone reckons Christopher Luxon's our man.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Crown has told the jury at the High Court in Auckland that the 27-year-old man accused of murdering Grace Millane took explicit photos of her body after she died. The man who assaulted the Green Party co-leader James Shaw has been sentenced to 9 months in prison. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters continue to be at odds over the rules on partnership visas that have upset the Indian community. And a former quality engineer, control engineer at Boeing, says passengers flying on board the company's 787 Dreamliner could be left without life-saving oxygen if the cabin were to suddenly decompress. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
And it seems to happen time and time again that corporations come in with promises of economic growth, employment, wealth, and we have people falling over backwards.
Live with local national